everyone, this is Novel Idea. I am here to do my November reading wrap up. Thanks for tuning in, and let's get started. First book I read is the very popular The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. So I think most people know the premise of this book because it's been like one of the most popular reads of the year. But for those that don't know, I will give you a quick summary. This book follows the identical twin sisters, Stella and Desiree. They are very light-skinned Black women. They are from a fictional town in Louisiana called Mallard. Easily for me, the most compelling part of this book is Stella's story, hands down. She kind of lives her life on Amber Alert, as one might call it. In fact, that's what someone said in this Guardian review of the book. She appears to come from nowhere to her family, and particularly her daughter. She refuses to talk about anything from her past, her family, or where she came from. Her husband kind of accepts this as, she had a really difficult childhood and didn't have, a good family environment, so she doesn't want to talk about it naturally. But the daughter is very confused as to why Stella won't discuss her past with her. She sort of rejects her past and the fact that she comes from a Black town and that she is from a Black family. She doesn't divulge this information to anyone as she really attempts to blend in to this white, wealthy society that she now finds herself in. And you can see this with Stella when in this entire part of the novel where there's a Black family that moves in next door, and the entire community has this like town hall meeting to discuss this problem where a Black family is going to move into their neighborhood and taint it or something like that. Stella is the most vocal one in this town hall meeting, and she really rejects this change in their community. For everyone else around her, they essentially applaud her for her community spirit. But with Stella, we know that it's really more so about her rejecting herself and not wanting to reveal that she actually, in fact, is Black, and that she does come from, a Black upbringing and a Black community. And so this, I think, really startles her, and it's almost like it would expose her in a way. So she really feels protective of her sort of livelihood in such a way that she is incredibly communicative about not wanting this Black family to move into their community. The tense sort of climate that puts her in with her family and her surroundings, where she can't really talk about who she is because she's trying to pull off this lie. You see how it really troubles her, and you kind of question, why are you doing this? I mean, obviously she decided to pass off as white because she felt that would bring her to much better opportunities and it would make her life a lot easier. In a lot of ways, it did, but it also completely isolated her from her family, and it completely detached her from her sense of self, and so goes through life in this really lonely way where she can't really relate to anyone. So finally, when this Black family ends up moving in, she forms a really strong connection with this family, even though she had previously rejected it. So that's only one plot line of the book. There are many more. I really liked it. I don't think it's phenomenal, but I found it very engaging, and I was so compelled by Stella's storyline that really sort of elevated the rest of the book for me. So yeah, that's The Vanishing Half. So the second book I read this month is the most popular book ever, The Crawdads by Delia Owens. So if you haven't read this book, which I think everyone has, I basically read this because I really wanted to know what the hype was. I've been recommended this book so many times, so I was going in with very high expectations, to say the least. The plots of Where the Crawdad Sings, it follows this young girl named Kaya who lives in a marsh, isolated area in her town. Kaya is abandoned by her family at a really young age. She lives essentially all alone except for her father, who is a abusive alcoholic, and he's the reason why Kaya's mother left along with her other siblings. He also eventually ends up leaving himself. So Kaya is entirely alone. She has to figure out her own way, how to feed herself, how to take care of herself as a child. Kaya figures it out through her own wit and resources and being very craftful with what's around her, and she does live in this beautiful sort of natural environment where she really connects with nature in this deep and fundamental way, and she is able to create this really tranquil life for herself in the marsh that she lives in. There is also this crime murder tale woven through the story. Kaya is accused of murdering one of the popular rich boys in town named Chase Andrews, and then there, at the end of the novel, it accumulates in this murder trial that is quite tense and puts Kaya in the spotlight where she's never been before, since she's lived her entire life in total isolation. She has the epithet, marsh girl, that's given to her. I will say my biggest critique of this book is the whole murder crime aspect of it. I found that was just like a totally unnecessary addition to this really nice story about this young girl who lives by herself and is incredibly in tune with nature and her surroundings and has this really beautiful relationship blossoming with this young boy. The whole Chase Andrews part just seemed like, honestly, if I can be entirely honest, seemed like Delia Owens gunning for a movie. It's totally unnecessary in my opinion. Like, the book has a lot going for it just with Kaya as a protagonist, and her life is complicated in and of itself. There really didn't need to be this other sort of side story that ends up, I think, detracting from the original message and spirit of the book. The meat of the novel is about Kaya and her intense loneliness that's attenuated through her relationship with nature. Delia Owens' writing, it's first of all incredible, but the way she writes about nature is really up there in terms of some of the best nature writing I have read. Willa Cather is one of the best writers on nature. Henry Thoreau and other really talented, famous nature writers. I think Delia Owens is up there. She has her PhD in zoology. I don't know exactly what it is, but she knows nature and she is able to write about it, and you can tell. I did love Kaya, the protagonist. I did really enjoy the writing, and I really enjoyed the relationship with her and Tate. It's really beautiful and it's really heartwarming. I liked it a lot. I did really enjoy this. It took me a little bit to get into it, but once I was into it, I was definitely very into it. Where the Crawdads Sings. The third book that I read is the very prescient, incredibly uncanny novel by Ling Ma called Severance. This, I think, would kind of classify as millennial fiction. This novel follows our protagonist, Candace Chen, who works at a publishing firm, and she oversees the manufacturing of Bibles. That's her department. Candace is this 20-something-year-old, very kind of apathetic about everything in her life, but she finds a lot of sort of peace and, I don't know, I guess, she likes her routine, basically. Let's talk about Chen fever. So this is probably one of the weirdest fictional diseases I have ever read about. In the book, there is a pandemic, a global pandemic, as we are currently living through, but this one's called Shang fever. And Shang fever starts off as kind of cold-like symptoms, but as it progresses through the body, it ends up manifesting in the strangest kinds of erratic behavior. The fevered, as they call them in the book, are those people that are stuck in this repetitive cycle of some really monotonous activity that they do in their lives. There is this one scene where Candace and a group of unfevered individuals are looking at this family that has been fevered, and the mother is essentially just setting plates on the table, setting the cutlery down, setting, I guess, like these dishes that probably don't have any food on them, and then sitting down, pretending to eat, standing up, gathering all the plates, collecting all the knives and cutlery on the table, and then doing the same thing over again ad infinitum. They don't do anything else, and they're completely oblivious to it. They're kind of in this fog cloud-like state where they're just endlessly repeating the same thing over and over and over again. It's very absurd, and reading about it is very entertaining. The book jumps back and forth between present and past, where the past kind of continues to unravel Candace's story. So you learn about her parents having immigrated from China. She really predicts a lot of things dead on. Like, she's talking about N95 masks. She's talking about total lockdown, all these protocols that we now have in place. So it's creepy to read about it, and her accuracy is definitely kind of jarring. Candace is really trying to ride out this pandemic and still goes to her job every single day, even when she's like the last one in the office. Yeah, it's an interesting read. The Shang fever, again, is very strange and it's just, I want to know how she came up with this. It's such an interesting disease that she creates. Definitely has a very millennial fiction flavor, in the sense that it's probably overall less plot heavy and more just kind of an attitudinal view of life that kind of like permeates the novel, and just the sensibilities that are conveyed in the book are very in line with other novels of this genre. And like, as an example, I would say something like, I don't know, Elif Batuman's The Idiot, although I much preferred that book, or like Raven Leilani's Lester. Overall, this book it was good. It wasn't great. I did like it, and I think it's Ling Ma's debut novel, so I would be curious to read more books from her. I think she's very imaginative and certainly can weave together a pretty good book. So yeah, that was Severance by Ling Ma. The last book I read in November is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. The plot of this book culminates sort of early on in the beginning, where there is this very heated scene that takes place. The protagonist is this young Black woman named Amira, and she is a babysitter, and she is taking the little girl that she babysits, she's taking her to a grocery store on the request of the family that she works for. When she gets there, she ends up being accused of kidnapping this little girl, and a very heated exchange takes place with the security guard working that shift. On the side, there is this guy who is filming the interaction, and his name is Kelly. So that's sort of the catalyst of the novel. After this scene takes place, the little girl's family, in particular her mother, who is another main character, her name is Alex. She's like a very progressive, early 30s white woman who is very wealthy. She becomes inspired to learn about Amira and develop a relationship with her after this takes place, because she feels partially responsible, of course, for this happening. On the flip side, there is this man named Kelly who filmed the interaction. He ends up bumping into Amira again, and the two kind of begin this relationship. Anyone that's read this book knows it's pretty obviously poking fun at white people, in particular making fun of their kind of racial anxieties, so to speak, their wokeness, if you will call it that. It gives a very unflattering point of view on the two white people that are engaging with Amira. So Alex in particular, who is the woman that Amira works for, she is pretty odious and just kind of pathetic. She's very concerned with how Amira perceives her. She really wants to seem like cool and progressive and very in with like the culture, and in the know and all that kind of stuff. And Kelly, on the other hand, he's very like kind of fetishistic over Black people. All of his previous relationships were with Black women. It makes it very uncomfortable, especially for Amira, who is very aptly aware of these two people and their racial point of view. I hope my views on this book don't come across as contentious. I just didn't really like this book very much. It's hard for me to criticize what the book is saying because I do think that the author is making a point and it's a valid point. These people who are really trying to be, progressive and anti-racist, they're kind of being or expressing their own form of racism by really only focusing on this woman's Blackness and kind of reducing her identity to the color of her skin. They're obsessed with her to this really unhealthy extent simply because she's Black. That, I understand, is a kind of racism. It's this weird way of reducing a person to a trait, to one trait of who that person is. And there are very obvious indicators of that in the book. Like, for example, there's this one scene where Amira, who is the babysitter again, she uses the word connoisseur in a conversation with Alex, and Alex thinks to herself, wow, I can't believe she knows that word. And she kind of catches herself in a moment where in having racist thoughts. So there's a lot of that, this really awkward, tense dynamic where Alex is just trying so hard to have Amira like her, and she just needs her approval, and she kind of like divulges internally about how woke she is. She's read every book by Toni Morrison. She has a friend who is Black. Yeah, she is kind of stereotypically that white woman who she's incredibly privileged and also just like really self-absorbed. And so that's very clear in the book. The issue I have with this book, and I'm not offended by what the book is doing. I just think that it's a little bit mean-spirited. Obviously, the characters that Kylie Reid she's developing are these pretty arrogant and very self-involved people that are in their own ways racist. Are they horrible because they want to try and understand issues that are existing in the world? Are they horrible? Does that make them horrible people? I don't think so. Did they go about it the wrong way? Are they a little bit, maybe closed-minded and privileged in ways that blind them to thinking and stretching their thoughts? Yeah, I think that they are. But I don't think that they're bad people. I think that they're trying, and I think that, like a lot of people, they are not necessarily getting it right. Like, Amira's character in herself is not especially illuminating. She doesn't really have much of a character. Her personality, I think, is left very underdeveloped. We don't really learn that much about who she is so that we can actually kind of resist the racial stereotyping that Kylie Reid is trying to dismantle. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but she's not really, shedding any light on the perspective and views of this protagonist in a way that we would be able to get to know her more than just her identity as a Black woman. So I understand what she's doing, but I don't think that she does the best job of really trying to have white readers, elevate their understanding of racism, really connect with what it means to see a Black person and hear a Black person, because that's what the book is doing. You know, these white people really only see us through this one lens, and they don't really let anything else in. That's my biggest issue with the book. While race is an important and relevant part of who they are, it's not the end of it. I kind of think it missed the mark for me. I hope that that's not too controversial of an opinion, and I really hope that I get my point across. It's funny, you know, it is funny to see these white people sweat over their racial concerns and interacting with a Black person. That's Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. I'm very curious to know if you guys have read this and what your thoughts were. So please, yeah, let me know. So those are all the books I read this month. I am very curious to know of any books that any of you guys are reading, and if you've made it this far, again, I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me that people are watching this video. So yeah, leave any comments down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.